In preparation for disassembly of the 87cc engine, we want to do a few things. The first thing that you want to do is check to make sure that there's no fuel in the fuel tank. And inside the fuel tank is a strainer. We'll have to pull that out and look inside of the tank, make sure there's no fuel inside. And in this engine there is not. And pull the dipstick out and check, make sure there's no oil on the dipstick, and physically look inside of the crankcase to make sure there's no oil in it. Also, if your engine did have some fuel in it but you drained it, make sure that you turn the fuel off. And here's a drawing of the fuel. Sideways is off, vertical is on. So there again, I'm going to turn that off. And the first thing that I'm going to want to do is remove the bolts that secure the fuel tank. And if you look inside, there's a bolt here, and one bolt in the back. I'm going to use my 3/8 ratchet, my 3/8 extension, and in this case you have to use an adapter with your toolkits. We have a 10mm socket. And we want to make sure that the ratchet is in the loosening position, so you want to rotate this, and that would be loosening. There is a rubber hose in the way on the one bolt. You will have to just move that out of the way and make sure that you rotate the bolt the proper direction. And if it's easier to take the ratchet off, you can. If you want to leave the ratchet on, that's okay as well. It's important that any bolts that we remove, we set them off to the side, and we're going to thread them right back in to their proper spots so we don't lose them. Once you get the bolt loose enough, you can use your fingers. Rotate the engine around, loosen the bolt back here. And you may need your partner to support the fuel tank during the last bolt. And now that you have that out of the way, you can locate the clamp that holds the fuel line to the fuel tank. And you can use your fingers, or you can use your pliers. I'm just going to use my fingers. And you may need to rotate this hose. And pull it off the fuel tank. Set the fuel tank aside. Like I said, thread your bolts back in. So you don't lose them. You don't need to tighten them up, just get them started so that they don't fall out. Move the heat shield and the muffler. To do that, we have two nuts, and for those we will need a 13mm socket. Thing I forgot to mention is we are going to take this heat shield off first by using that same 10mm socket. Just move out of the way and make sure that you put your bolt back in the proper location. And I'm going to switch from my 10mm socket to my 13mm socket and remove those nuts. Here again, have your partner or support the muffler while you remove the nuts and lock washers. And also, there should be a gasket inside. You can leave that on and then take your bolts and thread them back onto the studs. coming out of the engine block. So I've got my lock washer, my nut, my next step is to remove my carburetor. And in order to remove the carburetor, you must remove the air cleaner assembly by loosening these two plastic headed bolts. And careful that you don't lose the air filter. There's a pre-cleaner, basically a metal screen with foam pad on it. Goes back in like that. And your air filter is going to go like that. We want to make sure that the air filter creates a seal when installed. There's a tight seal all the way around that so that dust and debris doesn't enter the carburetor and doesn't enter the engine. So put this together like that. You can set that off to the side. And inside of the air filter assembly, we have two 10 millimeter nuts. We're going to have to remove those. We have a hose going into the valve cover. We're going to have to remove that as well. So using my 10 millimeter socket and extension and ratchet, I'm loosening my nuts that hold the air filter assembly on. The hose should come out of the valve cover. It's just a press. The carburetor should wiggle out. We want to be careful of the linkage for the governor so we don't bend that rod. When we loosen the governor linkage up, be careful not to bend the linkage. When you loosen your nut, I'm going to take this off, and now my linkage, unhooked my spring. And you want to make sure that you take pictures of this before disassembly so you know how it goes back together. Now I'm able to slide my carburetor off. You're going to pull your fuel line out, and here's your carburetor. Engine side, air cleaner assembly side. My fuel line, make sure, and I'm going to put this back in place. Make sure that the gasket is still in place. And my next step is to remove the starter assembly and the housing.